You cold?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, big cold. It's winter, summer, winter starting, ashy season. It's cold outside, snowing outside. So
it's not cold inside.
yeah, but it's snowing. All right, guys. Welcome back to the Elevate podcast. And then we're just gonna go into the conversation, and I think it's gonna be an interesting one. Despite the constant drawback, I say what's interesting about entering into 2025 is we have the ability to not only reflect on what happened in 2024. So I know the last conversation I had with Tina, which is going to be my co-host, you say New Year, New Me is a scam, right?
Yeah,
So
I think I changed my mind.
okay, elaborate on that.
It's not a scam. It's just when you are constantly hoping and making New Year's resolutions and then procrastinating until the end of the year, you get to December and it's like, I didn't do anything. Then it's like New Year's, New Me is a scam because I haven't accomplished anything. There's nothing new about myself. My habits are the same. So what exactly is new if it's just 20 it's just if it's just the year 2025. So but I think it's important to make resolutions, like make reflect on the past year, reflect on the past month, reflect on the past day, and try to become a better person and improve on that. Not necessarily new me, because once you have that mindset of new me, you try to take on like this complete change and then it doesn't happen. So it's just like step by step. Not necessarily. So
So
not
like
not New Year's new me, but like be slow, be patient with yourself.
gradual steps.
Yeah, gradual steps and set like smaller milestones instead of this big old list of what you're going to accomplish every year, every single month, every single day. It's just not realistic. Just say this month I'm going to do this, get that done and move on.
You got any plan for 2025?
Consistency is good.
Yeah. In what
So,
area?
spiritually, getting back to prayers more. Just improving on myself education wise. I want to be better, and yeah, I'm just excited for this new year.
Yeah. What you got? What you got looking at? What you looking at?
Just looking at my notes or something.
Is it regarding the faith in politics or
Yeah.
okay, so the questions that I wanted to ask you, which I feel like this is gonna be what we basically just gonna cover within this segment. And I think what's interesting is that we have broad topics regarding what we believe, and not only what we believe but what we also are achieving within our life and what we are currently hopeful. Basically 2024 has been a massive year, and also when it comes to political, it has been a year that we had two parties come in, the Democrat and Republican, and ultimately the one who won was the Republican with Donald Trump, a controversial figure due to his extremist, I would say, being that controversial. A lot of Christians are, reluctant, and also when it comes to the Democratic Party, too, due to some of the view that Kamala Harris had, it's very extreme. A lot of Christians were also reluctant to step into, to voice their opinion basically in what is it that they stand for. And I think a lot of people made a stand this year more than any other year. But I want to ask you this question. And do you think, or how should I phrase this question? Should faith-based Christians, right, have a voice in politics? Should they be involved in politics? Should Christian be involved in politics?
Yeah, I mean, we could really dive deep into that, but I think the simplest answer is yes. Yeah, just that.
Yeah.
We dive into that. Yeah, the simplest answer is just
Elaborate.
we should be, as Christians, we should be involved in politics because Whatever happens with politics, legislations, the law that they create, they affect our daily lives as much as whether we know it or not, they do affect our daily lives. For example, schooling, all these things like the border, the problem that's happening with the border, and all these various issues, they affect us on an individual levels, and also as Christians, and also like people who are bringing children. We want to create a better world for everyone, want to create a more godly world on a faith type of perspective. So we don't just want the world to go however, but we want to sort of have a voice in this world. And it goes back to like the Great Commission, where the Bible tells us, go through all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and kind of preaching the gospel to everyone. And so we want to not just have our own spaces, but we want the gospel to be infiltrated in the government. We want to have people who can bring back godly values and make laws and legislations that uphold God
Yeah.
and put God first.
Okay. I think, was it yesterday that I was asking this study about how many, how many Christians are in like the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and it seems like it's a significant number.
Was it like 87%
it was
of
about-
Congress?
Yeah, 80 something percent of
80.
87% of Congress are like Christians. With the Democrat Party is about with the Democratic Party it's about like 67 or 70 something percent, and then within the Republican is like 99% of them are identified as Christian.
99%?
About 99%.
Wow, that's
it's
a-
like they're overrepresented.
That's
Like,
huge. But I think that with conservatism, some people can confuse that with Christianity.
okay,
Not
yes.
every conservative is a Christian.
Okay, so not every conservative is a Christian. Why do you think there's that line where it'd be like, okay, if you're a Christian, you're automatically gonna align yourself with conservatism?
A lot of conservative values are godly values. They're Christian values. Not everything, but a lot of them are upholding. They want God first. We want God first. We want family. We want marriage. We want things where we don't want. We want more like sort of like traditional things, not too radical. Of course, we want progress, but not too radical to the point that common sense is no longer common sense. So I think that a lot of Christians do tend to lean more conservative just because their ideas are more Christian leaning. It has nothing to do with just the party. But yes, there's some people who are like just because they're conservative, then I guess you're a Christian, and they still have different views. So
Yeah, they're not leaning.
yeah.
Do you think a lot of conservatives are passive when it comes to progressivism, like being progress?
I don't think so. I think it just looks different. I
just
think
look different.
it's different from a liberal perspective, because a liberal perspective, it's always about the new thing and accepting, I don't know, just embracing the new idea and this radicalized thing that we sort of create. There's always some type of invention that we're making with liberalism. That's what I think. So I don't think that they're against progress, but we want to observe what kind of progress is it. Is it going to lead us in destruction? Because not every progress is good, and a lot of times you don't want to lose your roots. You want your root to become the foundation of wherever you're going.
Okay, so first is establishing the foundations.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I think that's what the Constitution played a role, is establishing that vital foundations for everything to be built upon that. So as a Christian, right? And I think as a Christians, we should have a voice in politics. But what are the parameters? Like, are we to choose a side between who we align with ourselves? Do we go Democrat? Do we go conservative? It's like, what line are we able to, are we gonna choose a side, or we just participate based on what God is saying in that particular
I think
season?
there's because we live in the world, there's labels. And so when we choose a side that is more Christian leaning or promotes godly values, and let's say, for example, that side is conservatism, the conservative side, right, the right. So we're going to lean to the right, and that might be the group that we vote for, but we shouldn't just vote blindly without also judging righteously of what exactly is this party about. Not necessarily idealizing that political party, but really examining and saying, is this person or is this party for me? Is it upholding godly values? So we don't necessarily idolize that party and take it as something and start to worship it, but rather we just choose something that is more God leaning. So it's not, and also like when you ask that question, I think it comes from more like a standpoint of a citizen instead of someone who's actually in that role of making laws and legislation,
Yeah,
like
we are
a
in a standpoint of
president.
citizen.
Okay.
Yeah, as of someone who's voting, not
Someone who's
someone who's
voting.
acting to be a participant that enforce the law, but
Yeah.
that's just someone
Yeah, I think we
who's
should be
voting.
very careful to draw the line between your Christian identity and your political identity. You don't want to have the political spirit, because the political spirit can cause you to see us versus them, when it's God's values versus whatever the world is throwing at us. And if, let's say, the conservative side has more Christian values, then we're going to go with that. We're going to stand by
And
that.
if Democrat has more
We're going to stand
we're
by
gonna
that
stand
as well.
Okay, so it's mainly about representations of the kingdom.
Yes.
So representing the kingdom of God is mainly what is going to be the driving force, the mechanism to which allows us to make the decisions to move forward in terms of like, who are we going to vote for? Right. So that's the basis.
Yeah, everything should always be assessed based on biblical principles. So if the conservative side decides to go high wire and do whatever, then we should be able to assess that and say, you know what, this side is not for me anymore because they have left. And I think with this election, a lot of people were saying that the Democrats have left me. Not necessarily that I've left the Democrats. They're not necessarily going to the conservative side, but they just don't understand what the Democratic Party is doing anymore. And so you hear people saying the Democratic Party left me because they have kind of changed their gear, and the things that they're doing is just too radicalized that even the average American person is saying it might be a little too much.
Okay, so they're bringing in the extreme, which is like contrary to what
Yeah,
a
so
normal person
yeah,
is
just
willing to.
don't be so loyal to something that you forget to assess it and understand what exactly are their principles, and don't just believe blindly. Continue to assess, continue to do reflections and do research so that you know more about that party.
Why do you think a lot of Christians are leaning toward being a right wing rather than left wing?
Yeah, also I think like on a daily basis, it's just easier to choose a group and stick with it, because people have their daily lives and it's not always easy to catch up with the news, especially with the media as it is right now. A lot of things are propagandized and you have to do your own research. And so sometimes it's like, let me just lean conservative because they're known to uphold Christian values. They're known to be more traditional. And as we know, America was built on traditional values or on Christian values. And so if you choose to be a conservative, you'd much rather just go with that and stick to that and stay. For like most Christians, they much rather stick to being conservatives, and sometimes even without reflection, but just stick to that because that's kind of how it's been.
But that doesn't sound very productive,
Yeah.
because it's like you just following blindly.
Yeah, you're just following blindly, but it's also like the easier way, because sometimes the struggles of life and you're just busy. You don't want to really get down into your research. And most times, because of like the political spirit, it kind of divides us to view others as kind of demonize others, even though they're on the even when they're on a different side of us, we always say maybe they're on the wrong side of history or on the wrong side
Yeah.
of politics. And so we demonize them instead of trying to understand them, and also like understanding the side that we're on, but also coming up with our own views and our own ideology, and really understanding, where do we stand as a person? Where do I stand with my family? What do I want for my children? Not necessarily what this political party wants for me, but what do I want for myself? And how does this political party align with my values? What are they doing for me? And I think that like, because we have, we the people, that our constitution says we the people, so it's the people choosing. But a lot of times these political parties, they overshadow the people, they speak more than the people do themselves. And so we appoint people to kind of like be presidents and just create these laws and stand in legislations, and we forget that we're supposed to be the ones in control. You're supposed to make laws for the people, not the people appoint you and you just make your own laws. No, you're supposed to make laws for the people, and we the people should hold you accountable. But sometimes we don't hold them accountable, and so it's like you just vote for a president. I feel like I'm going off gear.
No,
Yeah.
I know, I get what you're saying. It's like, what's interesting about the whole thing is that just the whole political realm become complex to where a regular person is like, you know what, I'm not even gonna touch it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even gonna watch the news. I'm not even gonna listen to it, because like you say, a lot of places, a lot of news, especially the media, are like propagating their own and proposing their own ideology out there.
Yeah, their
So
own narratives.
their
It's
own
really just
narrative
an
out there.
agenda
So
at this point.
even with Mark Zuckerberg came out with saying that during the Biden administrations, they were propagating, they were like kind of like forcing him to basically saying that anything that speak against the vaccine, and I'm not saying anything bad against the vaccine, but anything that speak against the vaccine, he was allowed to take it out. So it's like,
Yeah.
we don't know how much of information that is going out there, which is the reason why, by the way, fact check is gonna be removed from Facebook, which is basically like, if there's any wrong information that went out on social medias, there was gonna be like a red light, something like that share fact check information. Have you ever seen some of those where
I
it's like
The only time I've seen it was like on Twitter
on
when
Twitter?
Trump would post something and they would fact check
Fact check.
him.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So that is on Facebook, Instagram, and everywhere. But Mark Zuckerberg is gonna remove that. So we know that there has been time where informations in the news can be propagated to, basically shut down one ideology and propose their own ideology. We know that that's happening. And I think that complexity of politics makes it so that a regular person just doesn't have the time to like look into all that. Like, because you have to look at deep, like you have to find out who is the source of the information. You have to like look at it so deeply that it's like, why waste all the, people got time, people have family to take care of, people
Yeah.
got jobs. Why waste all this time to look into something that is very complex? And I think that might be an intentions where maybe someone is propagating that too, the whole complex ideology, that is going out there. So I don't know.
Yeah, but it's also very stressful getting into politics, because I think last year I really got into politics. I was listening to a lot of conservatives, and at some point, as much as it was very enlightening for me, it was also kind of devouring me in a way, consuming me in a way, and I felt like I couldn't really freely think for myself.
Yeah.
So as much as you're gaining all this new information, you have to come up with your own thoughts. It came to the point where I would listen to a lot of podcasts, but I had to minimize how many podcasts I'm listening to, and actually do my own research and actually like learn about what's happening, see both sides of the story instead of just what Candace Owen is saying or someone else, a conservative, is saying. I have to learn that information for my own, because I have to believe what I have to, like, those ideas that they present, I have to make them my own. And in order to do that, I have to think for myself. And so sometimes it becomes hard, and it's
Wait,
like,
what do you mean by making the idea to present your own? Isn't that originally their idea?
no, it's not that it's their idea. It's just there's certain ideas, like we can have shared ideas. Like, I don't exactly know how to.
Like examples, like let's say marriage, family, the building blocks of any government system is family, having a strong family. So if the conservative, the right wing party are pushing on that agenda of like, we have to have a strong family, and your idea is basically saying the same thing. Your concept of what it means to have a strong society is having a strong family.
I understand
That's shared
that.
idea, right?
Yeah, I understand that,
Is that
but
what you're referring to?
no, not necessarily, because I think that's a more mundane way to put it.
I
And
mean,
I
it's a
think,
basic example
yeah, it's
as
a
to what
yeah. I
that
think
could be.
I think that's something that you don't necessarily need someone else to present it to you for you to say, okay, this sticks with me. But it's more like with political issues, things that are happening in the world, like a lot of stories, I can't really name one, but a lot of stories that are happening in the political spheres. And so you hear this news, Trump did this, Kamala did this, and just many things that's happening. And so you listen to a podcast and they have their own views on it. And you agree with that view, but you don't really have the full information because you didn't do your own research. And so that's the point. That's the dilemma that I was in because I wasn't doing my own research. The research that I had was podcasts. And, podcasts are the views of people. They give information, but a lot of this information has their own views and it's biased in a way. And so it came to the point where their views would become my view. And so I wasn't going out
So
and
it's like
fully
you are accepting someone
yeah
else's view,
as my
opinion
own as my own
on an event as your own
as my
without actually
own
looking at the event.
without really yes simply because they're a conservative and I like that person. I
Yeah.
agree with them on most things.
Would you say that also play a part in terms of like you not having a time to even look at
Yeah.
the event?
That
because
could
of how
play a
complex
part.
it is.
That could play a part in it because I think just the looking it might be difficult to find the right informations, but also if you spend an hour listening to a podcast, I'm sure you have time to search it up yourself. So it's just, I think sometimes you just don't want to go through the trouble. You rather listen to someone else and you want to listen to their views, but it's also important to have your own view and know where you stand on the topic.
Yeah, I think looking at both sides allows you to actually come to your own resolution or your own thoughts process, which I think also when it comes to like the Christian value, right? Which a lot of Christian value align with right wing value. But the interesting part is, and when it comes to like when I'm listening to people like Lecrae, and he did a podcast and he asked this question because I also want to touch on this as well. He asked this question. So there is the right wing, which Christian, I'm a Christian, and this is him speaking. I'm a Christian, and I'm gonna follow to the right wing because their ideology, their policy align with most of them. But I'm also black, and how does that play a role in like the whole thing with like with me being Christians as well as me being black. Now, he was speaking from a standpoint of being African American. We're not African American. We are like Africans who came to America. So I don't know how we would call it us in that sense. But we are African American, but we were not born here. We came from Africa. So we have different ideology than him. But as being an immigrant, I think that's another big factor. And Christian as well. And black, how would you go about like doing research and identifying which party should I align myself with?
I think I did hear that quote somewhere when I was listening to a podcast from him, or it might have been him, but I think there's a lot of people who've said something
There is
similar.
a lot of people who say something
where it's
similar.
like I have my own personal identity.
Yes.
And with that comes history. And we live in America, so we know the historic background of African Americans and what they face, and how do we reconcile this with conservatism and what they're for, knowing
Christian.
our history. And I feel like the big thing with that is really like learn the truth, like go back to the truth, because a lot of times when you go back to history books, they don't necessarily teach us the full scope of our history. But when you really get deep into that, that's when you really start to understand. And also I feel like as a Christian, whatever identity you are, whether you're black, white, or Asian, you're a Christian first. And so understand that and then move on with that. Like reconcile your Christian identity with your race.
How does that look like? Because the Christian value is basically the Christian mandate, I would say, is like we are being taken from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light, right?
Yes.
And because of that, we have carried this new identity being the sons of God or children of the Most High God, right? Being, servants of God. So that's our identity, children of God. That's our identity. With that identity coexist with the identity of being black or being white or being or the other identity of being, ratchet, I would say. So
It
it's like,
can
you know how that would be conflict between the two, right?
I think it can coexist, but at some point your Christian identity has to tramp over whatever identity you're taking
So
on.
regardless of how you feel when it comes to your identity of being black, your Christian identity trample that.
It has to trample that. I mean, you have experiences, and these experiences shape your life and shape how you view the world. But ultimately, as a Christian, I think this is where you go back and say, regardless of what I've been through in my past and the context of the context of my past, the context of my history, I am a Christian regardless. I am whatever God calls me to be. Let's say you've been through a bad situation and you made some mistakes in the past, but you know who the Bible, you know who God calls you, you know what God calls you, you know who he calls you, his child. And let's say you're saved, like whatever past and whatever context that happened in doesn't necessarily define who you are. So I view it as my identity first comes from God, and then it is whatever that I am. And sometimes as a Christian, you're sort of combating between your Christian identity and your physical identity. Yes, I'm a Christian, but I'm still, I guess what Lecrae said, I'm black. I have these experiences. I've experienced racism. I've experienced discrimination and all of these things. And sometimes you can attribute that to the Republican Party or Democratic Party. But as a Christian, what side must I vote for as a Christian? What are the godly values that are being upheld? Sometimes I feel like we kind of have to put ourselves, I don't want to say
Like
put
a
ourselves,
feelings aside.
put your feelings
You
aside and
see,
choose God
that
instead.
itself, that itself speak volume to the quote that say die to self, right? It's like you have to deny yourself to some extent, where and not denying yourself doesn't necessarily meaning denying the pleasures, right? Because we can take that as, yes, denying our pleasures. Let's say, for example, you're doing something that is not in relation, is not in regard to what God wants you to do, then you have to deny that and choose God, right? So that's not necessarily what that verse is only entailing. It's entailing everything, like everything basically. So if God say, you know what, we're going left, but you want to go right, we have to go left.
Yeah.
Because that's what God said. It doesn't necessarily mean that like, oh, I don't have to follow that because of my own flesh or my own desire, but no, I have to follow it because God says so.
Because God says so. And sometimes you will feel like you are in the right because let's say you faced a lot of oppression, for example. Like I feel like you have every right to to kind of like take revenge, take matters in your own hands. You feel like you have every right, but God says the righteous way to go about things is the way that I'm showing you. And so it's kind of like your godly identity has to overshadow whatever identity that you have.
Yeah.
And allow yourself to die in Christ.
In Christ's reason. So ultimately, as Christian, we should be involved in politics.
We should be involved.
Because if we are not involved, someone else will make the decision for us. And I don't think we want to live in a world that someone else make the decision
and
for
also
us.
like I wanted to touch on, you know how they say the separation between church and state. Yes, I think it's fascinating because back in the days, the church, the legislations, the groups, they were trying not to get too involved in the church, or no, they wanted the church, they didn't want the church in legislation. But now I feel like the government is getting in the church more than the church is getting in the government.
Yes, it has reversed. I think the role has reversed.
Yeah.
Where the church was in the was in legislation, but now it's like the government is influencing.
Yeah, back in the day, the
church a lot.
priest was the king and government. They would be involved.
They were more involved in the making and the governing of a nations. But now it's like the government are influencing and in some instances oppressing the church.
What do you think about that? What's happening? Especially what happened during COVID.
Well, what happened during COVID is an interesting thing because it's like what you think wouldn't happen to the free world happened.
Yeah.
It's like people were stripped of their own voices basically because well, we have to get the vaccine now, or because we have to do this. And I understand that, there was a real situations and real crisis that was going on, and then people were dying truly. But to what extent does that occurrence that happened have to trample over our own, individual rights?
Exactly. I think that's where we have to be careful. That's where
So,
we have to be careful and not become too politicized, and also like speak back against like this kind of like governmental oppression. I think it's difficult now because the government has become so much more powerful, and everything that you do, even in a church, it has to go through sort of like the
the
government.
government, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's very easy to compromise because you can't even open your church freely. And I think that's what happened in COVID. Some people couldn't open their church, and if they did, they would get a fine or something. And so it's like, do I stand for what I believe in, or do I compromise?
Well, and I don't really know like the intricacy parts when it comes to the COVID situation with the church, mainly because it's like I wasn't really paying attention to it because we were doing a lot of our churches back in St. Louis. I was going in person because I would be the one like holding the camera and
Okay.
like doing the live. So it's like it didn't feel like nothing changed for me. So I wasn't even paying attention to that, or like what was happening with the church
Yeah, it was
in that
sometimes
time.
controversial
Yeah,
because pastors would get certain fines or punishments for opening the church to members. They would get punishments, but it was so controversial because when we had protests, thousands of people would go out and
would
they
go
would
out and
protest, and so the
yes,
church was like, you're not letting us open our churches to
but you allowed in
individuals, to members,
protest
but
to.
you're allowing protests in the name of free speech. How about church and state should be
Also,
separated?
another thing about churches right now, like I think Christians, to be honest with you, has been weak.
Yeah, we have become
We have
weakened.
become weak. We are divided among ourselves,
Yeah.
and not only that, but Christians as a whole has become weak when it comes to their voice. And I don't know how to view it because the complicated part is grace, love, and like retaliations, right? It's like we are conflicting between the idea of showing love to someone who like come against us, right? Rather than like how do we defend ourselves or how do we speak up against his voice, right? So it's like you see in Hollywood where Christians will be mocked, right? They will be mocked, and then
There's no
there's
type of
nothing,
rebuke. There's no
there's no rebuke, there's no
backlash.
backlash, there's
And
nothing
if
like
the
that.
backlash goes, it ends so
It
quickly.
ended so quickly.
Yeah.
Like what happened with the Olympic, and there was just massive Christian just got mad, and there was really nothing major
Nothing
that
really happened.
Nothing.
But
I
what
mean, we're not
if
expecting anything to happen crazy, like going out and killing people, but no. But it's just like there was nothing worth saying like, oh, this happened. This is something that defend us as Christians based on what happened at the Olympic. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I think we have to start defending our faith, even on the mundane level, because as Christians, I think a lot of Christians, they have good hearts, and sometimes when you have such a good heart, there's a difference between niceness and kindness, and so sometimes we tend to be nice instead of kind, which is like, I can be nice, I can be kind to you, but not too nice to the point that you can trample on me.
You can, yeah.
And so I can still set those boundaries. And I think a lot of Christians, it's like we want to be accepting because we're going out to the world, and we're not expecting them to be saved. We're not expecting them to understand us or even want us. We're expecting backlash. We're expecting rebuke. We're expecting like them to despise us and whatnot. But at the same time, we have to stand on something, especially as a nation. We have to stand and say enough is enough. We can't accept our God to be mocked. We can't accept certain things to be happening, because when someone mocks Islam, you will see a backlash. You will see legislations being made. Things will actually start changing. But because of love and acceptance, or in the name of love and acceptance, we tolerate certain things. Like, we've developed a kind of tolerance and a kind of like desensitivity with sin and just mockery of God. And I feel like it's that we have to come to a place where we can introduce like the fear of God. The Lord is not to be mocked. Of course, not to take things in your own hands, but you can still defend the gospel.
Yeah, because ultimately the vengeance is the Lord.
Is the Lord's.
Yeah.
But
But also another
there are
thing,
certain aspects where we become so passive, and it's like we leave everything to God. I'm just gonna pray about it. Like we just say, let's say something bad happens and the world is going crazy and whatnot. And as Christians, we have a voice we can speak, because I think 66% of America is
about 60
identifying as a
something percent,
Christian,
yeah,
60 something.
a higher
Yeah.
percentage.
Yeah. We think like we can just, lost my track of thought. But yeah, so I'm just saying,
I mean, like you're right, because about 60 something percent of Americans identify as Christians. If a politicians want to basically run for president, the first thing they do is go to church.
yeah,
Basically, not the first thing, but then initially they'll go to church and be like presenting themselves as
as a Christian, I mean, you want
God,
to
as a
appeal
Christian.
to
Yeah,
Christians because majority of those voters are Christians, and
yeah.
they're going to vote on those Christian values. But we have seen a difference in people who are identifying as Christians, and they vote for things that you would necessarily call godly in a way.
Well,
So
and then some other things is like questionable. So
yeah,
it's like,
certain things are questionable.
yeah, and also it's very complex. It's like some of these issues are interchangeable. It's like, okay, they're A plus here. I give them A plus on these situations, but a negative on this one situations, right? So it's like you just have to weigh between, and only we are limited to like two party only. Like the American government, the American system has so many party, but there's only
Only
two
two that
party.
run.
That is so sad. I
Yeah.
was like, it's kind of sad to where it's like, what if you want to have your own? What if you have 5 things that you need to be accomplished, and only 2 things can be accomplished in one party, and one thing can be accomplished in the other party,
Another.
and then the third, like 3 things can be accomplished on a third party, but that third party has no power at all because there's only 2 party, Democrat and
I
Republican.
mean, that's politics for
Yeah.
you. And also, like, money talks, especially in politics. You can't even run to be a politician if you
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
have money.
Kamala Harris ran through $1.6 billion, something
Yeah,
like that.
and she was still in debt.
$1.06 billion. Yeah, like her whole campaign was worth $1.06 billion. That's crazy.
It's a lot of money.
That's a lot of
But
money.
she was like, I think $20 million in debt.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't understand how.
That don't make sense.
Yeah,
to me.
it doesn't make sense. Oh, God.
That's a lot of money.
It's just a lot.
Well, so I know you wanted to do like 30-minute segments. So I think this will be it to start to end
Yeah.
with this one here. But ultimately, I want to have more delve into this conversation when it comes to politics and being a Christian. The next one I want to start with what constitutes the belief, like our belief systems. What constitutes our belief system as Christians, so that we can delve into going other delve more into like our faith when it comes to why we understand or why we believe what we believe in. But that's pretty much it.
Thank you,
Any
guys.
last thing you want to say, or are we good?
We're good. Thank you. Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year, guys. Take care. You have a blessed day. Bye bye.